Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to IQPC CX Asia Interactive. I'm Felicia and the Divisional Director here, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session. Now, before we begin, today's session is covering resilient, flexible, and scalable communications, how contact centers can transform the CX. Now, I'm sure you all experienced, it's been quite a whirlwind of 6 months, so I'm not going to take up any more of this time, and I'd like to share the stage or screen with Mehmet Hussein, who's the Technical Design Authority for Voxbone. Mehmet, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hello and good morning to everybody in my time zone. Good afternoon to those who are not. So, as was previously mentioned, we will be talking today about resilient, flexible, and scalable communications, specifically about how contact centers can transform their customer experience. So first, I'll give a quick overview of the agenda, what we're going to be talking about today. I'll give a little bit of introduction about myself. I'll talk about coronavirus and what the impact has been on customer contact centers and customer experience. I'll talk about what we suggest you would need to do in order to survive the times coming ahead. And I'll talk about one of the methods that we would recommend you employ, which is centralizing portions of your contact center to get the best efficiency in your customer experience. And lastly, at the end, there will be a Q&A section. Feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation. There is a dedicated section at the end where we will be answering questions with dedicated time allotted to it. So without further ado, my name is Mehmet Hussein. I'm the Technical Design Authority at Voxbone. I've been in the telecommunications industry for approximately 10 years. I've worked on numerous contact center projects, including design, deployment, build, scoping, pretty much every facet of the contact center deployment world. So, global lockdown. What's been the impact on contact centers and customer experience? You will have undoubtedly seen a vast increase in the volume of calls. These calls will be coming from unhappy customers. These calls will be coming from customers who are in a fragile state. You may be making these calls outbound to dull the effect of the coronavirus on your business unit, so you might be proactively reaching out to customers. Either way, there has been a massive increase in the volume of calls. What we've seen in general is that the increase in volume of calls has been poorly kept up with by traditional contact center deployments. There are numerous examples in the news of contact centers being completely overwhelmed by the influx in volume. There are examples that I've personally been affected by, nothing serious at all. I mean, we were buying a kitchen. Just to get in contact with the kitchen suppliers, they stated that due to coronavirus and due to the volume of calls they were receiving, they had to close their contact center and prioritize email-based tickets. That's a primary example of an inability to cope with an increase in demand. Alongside this increase in volumes, you will undoubtedly have seen an increase in the complexity of each one of these calls. This is a fragile state. This is a new uncharted territory for most of us. Coronavirus will be a generation-defining event. There will be people who have complex problems relating to your product or service, and most likely not the run-of-the-mill questions that your contact center agents have been being trained on for the entirety of their career. This, coupled with the increased volume, led to difficulties in organizations being able to service these calls. Now, some of you might be saying, well, what about automation, AI? Yes, this can help to a degree. But to some extent at the moment, AI and automation relies on somebody to first go in and design the parameters for the contact center to work around in order to get the AI to do what you want it to do. There's no good having a bot on your website or an automated flow that helps people pay their bill on time, when in actuality they're trying to say, I can't pay for 6 months and this is an unknown circumstance and I'm trying to take advantage of some such other government incentive which you should be aware of. This requires flexibility in a contact center, and more often than not, it's quicker to deal with these influxes with actual people unless you've got limited defined AI paths already built. We're not quite at the stage yet where contact centers can build their own paths depending on the volume that's coming, but we might see that in the future. And lastly, working from home. Almost every country around the world enforced working from home at some point or another for those who it was absolutely possible to do so. Now, I would class contact centers as people who are able to work from home, providing that the people who run the contact centers have set up the environment correctly. We will explore what the impacts on efficiency have been. So you've had to expand your contact center as big as you can get it to deal with this almost unlimited amount of demand. You are more than likely having to rapidly hire new staff into your contact center or outsource to BPOs, where more often than not, the level of competency relating to your specific business is going to be lower than your well-entrenched employees. So efficiency will more than likely have taken a drop off. This puts more stress on being able to scale up quickly. Coupled with that, people are working from home. I know I've got a newborn daughter. She sometimes decreases my efficiency. I want to go and play with her and see why she's crying. But there will be a whole range of reasons why people's efficiency might be degraded by working from home, especially in the beginning stages when people are all getting used to it if they've never done it before. What about connectivity and security? So you may have gone from an environment where you can control the connectivity by one single pipe or a diverse pipe or whatever into your contact center, and you can control the security for every person in every workstation, to now everybody working from home. All of a sudden, everybody is using their own separate, non-business grade connection to connect into the contact center to receive vital information to do their jobs, more often than not using VoIP-based services over residential broadband circuits. Now, in general, this is okay, but when everybody is doing it, this presents a problem. And security. How can you guarantee that the environment that the worker is working in is just as secure as the environment that they were in a contact center building or place of work? You can't really. New tools have had to be developed to account for this risk to help this industry stay on its feet. So in the next slide, you'll be asked a poll question. So we'll move to that now. Do you experience spikes and falls in your contact center around the crisis? I think it should say, did you experience? So please answer now. I'll give it a minute or two, and then we will move ahead to the poll results. So without further ado, we can move on to the poll results. So we can see that the overwhelming majority experienced spikes and falls in this crisis. And it's important to mention that with nearly every spike comes a fall. There is a medium of where your volume will normally sit at, and a specific crisis or some such other event is likely to cause a spike and then it will fall back down. So it's not normally applicable to say we're just going to scale up and keep it there, because you need flexibility. Now, the priorities of a contact center when focusing on customer access can be defined roughly in these three sections. The ability to scale up and down quickly. So as we discussed, you might have a spike due to some such other unpredictable or predictable event. It might be Valentine's Day or Christmas or something like that. But equally, there are unknown events coming up like coronavirus or other natural disasters can cause a need for rapid expansion and then a decrease in the level of services. This is a key priority for contact centers. It's also key that the contact center is built on a robust infrastructure. This robust infrastructure can't just be penned into one single way of working. It must also be flexible, as we mentioned previously. Alongside the ability to increase and decrease the size of the contact center capability comes hand in hand the need to be able to scale up the back-end traffic handling capability of the carrier services, which ultimately underpin most voice channels of multi-channel contact centers. We'll move on. So as the world moves into a global recession, which is likely, if not already happening, customer experience will define brands. Coronavirus has caused many wide and varying problems. Most of them will have an emotional and/or financial implication. This means that the positive resolution of whatever issues are dealt with will have significant implications, directly relating to customer satisfaction and customer retention. Coronavirus is a generation-defining event, which will go down on to be studied and more than likely taught in schools. It's not beyond reality to imagine a module in the future titled "How did organizations respond?", in which successful positive customer interaction examples will be vital to being reflected positively in our history books. This really is an event that will be talked about for decades to come. And our next poll: how important is customer experience for your company? The overwhelming majority, unsurprisingly, has said that it is very important, and crucially, nobody indicated that it's not important, which is exactly what I would expect. Now, what we're going to talk about is using cloud as the customer experience differentiator. So we're talking about not only having the capability to base your contact center in the cloud, but having the reassurance that every link of the chain is built in a cloud-based flexible manner. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't have in-country gateways where flexibility is required or where there are specific in-country regulations, but the core of your contact center business should be able to scale with the demand and pivot as and when is necessary. Cloud-based contact centers facilitate rapid and agile expansion. Imagine if you were selling a product and for some such reason a celebrity endorsed it. You weren't necessarily expecting it, or maybe you were, but your contact center might explode in volume. You need to be able to deal with these events. Building your contact center based on a cloud-first strategy will enable the customer experience to be greatly enhanced. You'll be able to scale with demand. Crucially, you'll be able to see it happening, because in many cloud-based infrastructures, there are links built for data to be transferred between marketing departments, CRMs, customer contact centers, and equally, if you have the right carrier-grade backbone, you can directly interface, probably via API, to say, hey, we know we've done a marketing campaign on date X, Y, and we predict that in a day or so we're going to need additional capacity. Quickly send some API calls over to the carrier to turn up our capacity in the markets where we've advertised. Now, this process flow already exists. It's well established. But it could be automated. You shouldn't necessarily need a person to intervene to say so. Now, what if the person or the business unit, what if the person who manages it is off, or the business unit isn't necessarily working as it should do and the timing is slightly out of kilter? What you end up with is an increase in demand and an inability to scale with the demand, often leaving people scrabbling to put things together to service this influx of traffic. And we'll move on to our third and final poll. How important is the stability of your cloud infrastructure to your contact center? So we'll move on to the poll results. Now, the majority has said that it's very important. And surprisingly, some have said that the stability of the cloud infrastructure is not important. Now, I would be very interested to know the viewpoint of those that voted in that manner. So please post your comment in the question section. I'd love to discuss it, because that represents an interesting viewpoint. And an example of good work being done in the cloud is the project that we at Voxbone have undertaken with one of our key customers, Genesis. Now, they have done a piece of integration work with Voxbone entitled Voxbone for Genesis that allows an enterprise organization to take a Genesis deployment and seamlessly integrate the Genesis Pure Cloud environment with the Voxbone cloud-based carrier backbone with a few clicks of a button. And this is a collaborative piece of work that has already allowed substantial enterprise customers to scale their contact center seamlessly, implemented before the coronavirus outbreak. We have seen this working in live action. This joining of two cloud-based platforms gives a massive amount of customer experience control. So as I explained before, you might put into the beginning of the loop that you're running a marketing campaign. You can run it through Genesis with workforce planning to say that I need extra agents on this day. Based off that workforce planning, you might spit out a report with an estimated channel consumption. That estimated channel consumption might hit an API that sends off to your Voxbone deployment that says, turn up the channels in these markets because we've done a marketing campaign. Or even with much less notice. For example, you might say on Monday, due to coronavirus, we're receiving a massive amount of calls inbound. Immediately send an API call to Voxbone to turn up the traffic. Because Voxbone are cloud-based, we're able to turn up capacity in a very short amount of time, meaning that you reduce the amount of time where you're down and not receiving calls, where your customers are receiving busy tones or some such otherwise, leaving you with the only real complexity in managing a contact center, getting the people to answer the phones. That's the management of physical people is often the limitation in scaling contact centers which are cloud-based rather than the services that underpin them. The last point to mention on this is adding a cloud carrier into the larger contact center mix for your organization gives you a greater level of control all the way up the communication stack. This way you have direct control over the organization that is giving you coverage in the markets that you operate in, rather than being beholden to a provider who may choose to go for a cheaper alternative in the short term with a less cloud-focused vision and with a slight inability to scale with demand. So, centralizing contact centers in the cloud. I definitely don't mean that a contact center should be moved in its entirety to one place. When I say centralization of contact centers in the cloud, what I mean is a centralization of the management and deployment of contact center services. So your servers can be distributed to several availability zones. Nowadays, clouds are not literally up there in the clouds. They're distributed across many regions because the world is big and stuff takes time to get from point A to point B. So I would recommend that you centralize the management in one single cloud platform with the ability to distribute real-time media processing resources throughout the world to minimize latency. Connecting that into a cloud-first, cloud-native carrier backbone that is also deployed in a centrally managed but distributed capability fashion. Some of the issues that centralized contact centers can solve are customers stuck on hold. If you have a customer stuck on hold, there are really going to be two reasons for this. Either you don't have capacity to service the call. Using a cloud-based carrier will fix this problem. Or you don't physically have the agents available to take this call. Using a cloud-based contact center will allow you to deploy agents wherever they are based with almost zero time to being live, because all that the person on the end requires is a device to receive phone calls. Could even be as simple as getting calls forwarded to a mobile phone, and often an interface with which they are streamed data to manage the calls that they are receiving. And as I mentioned in the previous point, manpower for peak call volumes. This can be solved by cloud-based contact centers because of the ability to quickly get new people onto your platform taking calls. Centralized cloud contact centers have also enabled people to rapidly scale up and scale down, as I mentioned before. This is because with cloud-based environments, you can just turn up the dial. All you're going to be doing is consuming more of a effectively infinite resource sitting in a cloud environment, normally run by somebody who's got massive amounts of overhead. There's no need to necessarily deploy new boxes, get stuff shipped to site, have a person install it in a rack, etc., etc., etc. Those delays are done. And this will enable you to differentiate your business. You will be the one who is remembered as the organization that didn't necessarily have a problem with coronavirus. You managed to get all of your customer queries sorted within a timely manner. Yes, there was a minor delay at the beginning because it was a massive, unpredictable world event, but you dealt with it well because your customer experience strategy was based on a cloud-first directive. And now we're going to talk a little bit about Voxbone. So, Voxbone are a cloud-first, cloud-native voice and messaging provider. Effectively, we provide SIP trunking in 65 countries around the world over a wholly owned voice backbone. We are built on open standards. So we use the SIP standards as defined in SIP RFCs. So we are completely vendor agnostic. This means that we can easily and quickly be integrated into any contact center platform that is willing to open its doors. So enterprises, you can come and speak to us to get recommendations of contact center providers that allow you to build in such a fashion. This not only benefits us, obviously, but it benefits the enterprise because they build the customer experience interaction side in the contact center and contract with the carrier separately, allowing them to remove either one at any stage of the process without affecting the other one if one or other of them is not quite up to scratch. Quite often, I have seen enterprises and organizations stuck with a certain level of customer experience just because the contact center provider is one of the only ones that provides coverage in XYZ region. This is a problem that should not exist. We offer one SIP trunk configuration option. What this means is you can connect to us in as little as one single location and have accessibility to our entire global footprint. Some other providers will require you to connect in their specific countries to receive service in that country. We don't necessitate that at all. In fact, you can consume our services over the public internet. So we had, at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, people reaching out to us to do these deployments effectively immediately because they were seeing demand that their traditional implementations couldn't satisfy. We were able to pivot and do good things for our customers and new customers. You've got no need to set up and configure new trunks as and when you move into new markets and things like that. This is all taken care of by one single set of configuration. And scaling to new regions or onboarding new customers is made really quite simple with Voxbone. We enable this through our portal-driven interfaces and backed up by our APIs. As I mentioned before, you can connect your provisioning systems and your provisioning workflows directly to the Voxbone backend by way of an API to enable automated provisioning workflows. So you can say, when you have 10 new starters join, you need to increase the capacity with Voxbone by 10 channels. This can be an automated order placed, leaving no room for human error. Now, as I mentioned, we span across 65 countries. We've got presence in the Americas, EMEA, and Asia Pacific. We've got physical locations in 6 strategic locations around the world, with a further 13 or 14 localized media processing locations which connect to our in-country connections where we service our connectivity. We are a bona fide provider of these services, owning our own regulatory relationship with the regulators in countries, aiming to be national operators everywhere that we operate. So with one single connection, one single contract with Voxbone, you can have service in 93% of GDP areas in the world. An example of a contact center provider who has worked with Voxbone and has been able to superpower their business, Nice in Contact. So a quote from Donna at Nice in Contact: Voxbone is there to do the heavy lifting. They've always done the hard work for us. As we expand into new markets, Voxbone gives us an advantage. So with Nice in Contact, we provide them with inbound voice across 51 countries, providing them with toll-free numbers and other numbers so that their customers can use those to have marketing campaigns, etc., etc. We have an interconnection strategy with Nice in Contact so that they are meshed into Voxbone's global VoIP mesh network. Nice in Contact can offer one-stop contact center solution to customers. That includes access numbers in all the markets that Voxbone have access to, which is 65 countries around the world. Now, we're going to do a little bit of recap before we get to the question section, so please get your questions in now. Owning the touch points within customer experience, aiming for the sweet spot is the title of this summary type slide. You want to be able to build data from every interaction with your customers. Now, whether this is on a phone or a web chat or a WhatsApp or an SMS channel or an email channel, it doesn't matter. All this information is valuable. You want to be able to take that information and drive the contact center deployment and drive the contact center development to optimize your customer experience. You need to have support across multiple devices. I think it was a few years ago that statistic was released that the majority of websites are now accessed on mobile devices rather than on laptops or PCs. This was a somewhat landmark event in reality, because all of a sudden the internet that was designed for consumption on laptops and PCs is the majority being accessed by something that didn't really exist when the internet first came into its conception. So you must appreciate how people will be connecting with you and develop your customer experience accordingly. You need to understand your customers, understand where they are, who they want to call, what's easy for them, understand what the problem is. You need to understand why they might be calling you. If you can preempt these queries from the customer, you can forearm your contact center agents to be ready to answer these questions in a timely and effective manner. All of this allows you to create new value for your business, because you'll be able to define yourselves in the market as the people that really do it well. When somebody calls your contact center, they hang up the phone with a smile on their face because their problem has been resolved in a timely manner. They didn't have to spend ages waiting on hold. The customer contact center representative knew exactly what they were phoning up to speak about because they had access to all the information from the previous interaction. The call quality was fantastic, so there was no issue with robotic sounding callers or any of that more legacy focused problems. And the customer is left feeling happy. This allows you as an organization to identify the sweet spot between customer service and customer experience. This is crucial to surviving the coronavirus crisis that we are currently in. Now, in summary, cloud for customer experience. It's going to be a positive point of customer experience differentiation. You will be able to be defined by how you dealt with some such other large event that caused a peak or trough in traffic. The mundane run-of-the-mill business is not really what's going to be remembered, so long as it's okay. It's how you deal with things in extreme circumstances that are often remembered. Working with a cloud-based carrier in relation to your customer experience will allow an efficient route to expanding into new markets. You work with one single provider that has access to many markets, means that you don't have to contract every time you need to break into a new market. Equally, with someone like Voxbone, the charging structures are all homogenized. The data collection structures are all homogenized. We can also represent a compliant route to expansion in all of the markets where we operate. As I previously stated, we own a regulatory relationship with the regulators in the countries where we operate in every case. And now, without further ado, we have a dedicated time for questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Right. So first one's up. Let me just try and go in order, I guess. Someone was just asking if, Yeah. If Voxbone is a contact center solution, and do you provide integration with CRMs?
So Voxbone are not a standalone contact center solution. Voxbone are an international carrier that can superpower your traditional contact center deployment. So we work with contact center providers like 8x8, Nice in Contact, Genesys, to help them more or less dominate the market. If you were to look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant report and look in the top right-hand corner for CCaaS, you would see that Voxbone superpowers 100% of the organizations in that quarter.
All right. Someone is asking if you could explain a little bit further on how contact center cloud centralization will help in managing lack of manpower for high call volumes.
So, lack of manpower is only solved by increasing the number of people able to take calls. Having a cloud-based solution means that the barrier to getting those additional call handlers is not going to be technical, it's going to be the availability of people. You've removed one of the two barriers to getting people online. In fact, you've not only removed it, you've enhanced that limitation to be an advantage. You can now approach people in physically disparate locations, maybe in specific situations where you need somebody with a certain language set. You can approach people in different countries to service this requirement without having to physically get them to a location to do their work. So you might need to quickly expand into another country to service a specific set of demands that were previously being serviced from another country with other people in a contact center environment. Now you can contract out to local people in their houses in many different locations in order to service this manpower shortage.
I think it kind of leads nicely into the next one. What kind of providers do you currently work with in terms of contact center providers?
At the moment, we currently work with numerous contact center providers. As I previously stated, if you were to look at Gartner's Magic Quadrant top right-hand corner, we work with 100% of the people in the CCaaS segment. To name some names, we work with Nice in Contact, 8x8, Serenova, New Voice Media, Five9, Genesys, IOTA, and many more, some of which we can't mention due to contractual reasons. Direct enterprise customers that we have Uber, we have a large holiday booking website where you can book stays in other people's houses. We support them in their global expansion and global deployments.
Okay, that actually is great. I mean, now that you mentioned Uber, how exactly do you work with them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? So Uber have been a customer since 2018. They use us across 5 of their business units: Uber Eats, Uber for Business, Uber Freight, and Jump. They use us in 40 countries for numbering services across their contact, and specifically in their contact center. They use us for inbound and outbound termination. So we have been doing close business with them. I personally have spoken and done business with people in Uber for the deployment of their contact center and enabling their global expansion. We work very closely with them to enable them to work in all of the markets where they work, pertaining to their ability to interact with their customers using voice.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, how are you able to tell if your contact center is not leveraging the cloud?
Ask your provider. So you can ask your provider some questions. How quickly is it going to be for me to scale up in country X, Y, or Z? Who's your provider in country X, Y, or Z? This is a crucial question. If they're proud about the way that they've done this, they won't hold back the information. They'll say, okay, yeah, we use Voxbone or we use some such other carrier. They're a cloud-based, cloud-native, and they're best in breed. But if they're obscuring the answer from you, saying things like, oh, we use a special routing table to ensure that your traffic always goes to XYZ different array of carriers, that's not necessarily a good approach. You don't want somebody who's going to aggregate your traffic together, send it down several undefined routes where you don't necessarily have control over it. The kind of answer you want is a definitive answer saying that we use XYZ world-leading cloud-based carriers, and we can facilitate your expansion if necessary. We have published some articles already on our website and via LinkedIn that speak about how to identify if the carrier you're talking to is cloud first and cloud native. I would encourage you to have a look at our website and download this documentation, because it really does give you a step-by-step breakdown.
All right, brilliant. And the last one that we have at the moment, but I'm sure there will be a few coming in later, is what's the biggest learning that you've experienced yourself in the crisis for contact centers?
The biggest learning I've experienced is that contact centers were largely unprepared. There were a few exceptions that accepted that it was possible for something to come along that would give them an otherwise unimaginable amount of traffic, and they needed to design for such a disaster type scenario. The majority of organizations didn't. They had their predictable medium volume, and they allowed for a certain amount of overhead, which was nowhere near enough to cope with the coronavirus type level of traffic. So what we saw is many enterprise organizations and contact center providers and other carriers reaching out to Voxbone saying, for some such other reason, we made a mistake earlier on in the year in how we built something. Can you help us get out of this problem now? What that resulted in for us is we almost effectively sold out of capacity everywhere in the world, because most people weren't planning properly. What we implore you to do is plan properly. There should not be a significant increase in expense for building in flexibility into your environment. A large amount of this can be accounted for just by having a flexible type of deployment, rather than buying and hoarding masses of capacity in the background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is something that, at least within my own research as well, a lot of companies, I heard that because they went into a bit of a panic mode during the crisis, they just started stacking on a lot of different technologies in order to be able to meet the demand. And then, of course, that created a bit of a challenge when it was a work from home being issued. Now, we do have a question from Maynard from Cigna, where it's asking, what did you do to increase the call, giving trust to customers that we are there for them? Not quite sure I understand. You might be able to decipher that one for me.
Could you, let me just pull it up so I can read it myself. So this is, the answer to this question is twofold, right? There's an onus on the contact center operator to ensure that there are sufficient agents there to service the call. But equally, there is an onus on the contact center operator to speak in a coherent manner with their carrier provider to ensure that there is sufficient capacity there to service these calls, whether they're inbound or outbound. Those two would result in a happy customer. So having the capacity to service the calls and having the agents ready to take the calls with sufficient experience is going to represent a good level of customer experience.
Mm-hmm. All right. We don't have any other questions popping up, so I do appreciate. I'm sure there are some times that we do get some questions emailed to us after the conference, so I hope you don't mind that I forward them on to you so that we can get them answered, and we'll be able to link you up. Of course, anyone in the audience who feels like they would like to speak directly to Mehmet, just let me know, and we'll be able to introduce you. I hope you don't mind, Mehmet.
That's totally fine by me. And to all of the members of the audience, you can see that the information to contact Voxbone or contact me directly is now on screen. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter, and you've got my direct email address there. Please feel free to reach out if you want clarification on anything that's been discussed today.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate for the time and very insightful presentation as well.
Most welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining.